Hi, I'm Don Steyer, Director of Innovation at WBB, and today I'd like to talk to you about how we've helped our clients achieve mission performance goals even though they were facing very significant budget cuts. First, a little bit about WBB. We're a leading government solutions provider unconditionally dedicated to the success of our clients. We were founded in 1981. We have more than 400 employees, many of which are former public servants, leaders, and experts in industry across the multidisciplinary areas of practice. We have a unique customer-focused service delivery model where we provide persistent client-side support services as well as professional reachback services, supported by an operationally responsive staffing model to deliver diversified but integrated service offerings. What we value is passion. We really love what we do. Integrity. We deliver the people and the solutions we promise. And innovation. We design and deliver enduring solutions to meet our clients' most difficult mission-critical challenges. We serve defense, homeland security, federal agencies, health, and commercial industries. And our goal is simple. We establish clients for life, and we focus on value creation through customer collaboration, domain expertise, tailored methodologies, and innovative solutions to the problem. We provide a full spectrum of capability support across operational capabilities, acquisition and program support, analytics and mission support. And we do this by the way we leverage our understanding of the problem, the industry, and bundling these capabilities in an innovative way to solve our clients' most challenging problems. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we have developed organizational design and resourcing and our background in that area. And since 2007, or over the last 6 years, we've conducted more than 30 resource studies, staffing studies, manpower assessments. And really it's all about maximizing, in the areas of maximizing organizational efficiencies, planning reorganizations, mergers, or creating startups, improving the mission performance of an organization, or in many cases helping our clients navigate emerging or anticipated budget reductions. We've supported a broad set of organizations in terms of agency, mission, purpose, size, and scope, but in all cases they were facing significant problems in alignment challenges over a period of rising costs. So what do we mean? What are the challenges to achieving optimal mission performance? So if we look at this in a force field perspective, there are environmental forces driving change, budget constraints, evolving and fluid missions, poor performance, misalignment of resources to strategy, fluid and uncertain policy changes, and with technology, shortened decision cycle times. A real-world example of this is the recent memo from Secretary Hagel indicating a 20% reduction in headquarters. The memo says it's directed 20% cut in management headquarters spending throughout the Department of Defense. These cuts will take place regardless of the budget levels approved by Congress and are designed to streamline DoD's management through efficiencies and elimination of lower priority activities. So what are the internal forces restricting change? Well, urgency. Just like that memo, demands don't allow time to assess the need. Many organizations we deal with don't have the internal skills or experiences to be able to assess this accurately. There's a disconnect between strategy and work, and in many cases strategy adds work. We like to say, or like to joke around, but many of our clients are really drowning in data but starving for knowledge, and they are left with no way to connect all the dots. And there's a huge resistance to change because we've always done it this way or not invented here. So if history is any predictor of the future, back in 2010, the current Secretary of Defense really took some initiatives to look at the reduction of headquarters resources and looking for efficiencies because the headquarters had ballooned since 2001. But the GIO did a report on that in 2012 that said further efforts to examine resource needs and improve data could prove additional opportunities for cost savings. What they highlighted here was DoD proposed a $61 billion in additional savings over the FIT, but really provided limited information to what proportions these savings were specific to headquarters. And the underlying challenge that DoD faced is it didn't really have complete and reliable headquarters information available for use in making efficiency assessments and decisions. Really loosely translated, they were drowning in data and starving for knowledge, and really didn't have the ability or the intersections of the tools or techniques and technologies that would allow them to understand or gain insight into the problem. So what does this result? It really results in organizational turbulence, where your resources are allocated to things that are urgent but not necessarily important. In many cases, the priorities of the organization are not aligned to the organizational strategy or the required capabilities of the organization. A lot of times, because of the rapid pace of technology and the reach of communications, decisions are made by workers without leadership guidance. And there's an inability to effectively defend the resource requirements. And in many cases, leaders are reacting to change instead of preparing a response or responding to change. And in all cases that we've run into, they lack collaborative, actionable, and analytically based insight. So since 2007, we've been maturing and evolving methodologies, tools, processes to develop intelligent organizations, which include a holistic approach, rapid diagnosis of the organizational health, the ability to predict required capacity and resource requirements, the integration of data and management and business intelligence technology such that there's transparency, and then objectivity, because in many cases politics and the most powerful stakeholder or the closest fire is winning. So let's talk about a real example of an organizational misalignment. If you look at this chart, this is from a recent study. This organization had 7 strategic priorities or capabilities, and in the blue represents the relative priority of those capabilities, and as you can see in strategic priority 1 is about twice as important to the organization as priority 4. In the red is really where the workforce is spending its time. So what you end up with is the highest priority is getting the lowest amount of effort, and the lowest priority is getting the highest amount of effort. And those generally represent sustainment tasks or administrative tasks and those things that you do to support your organization. So why does this misalignment happen? Well, it's generally a lack of clearly communicated priorities. We've been in organizations with as few as 3 strategic missions, or as few as 3 missions, and claimed as many as 30 missions. And I've never been in an organization who actually prioritized those missions. So if they're all the same priority, then they're all treated equally. And so there is no trade space. Undocumented work that's been assumed without clear direction or purpose. This oftentimes happens because of a need that's arisen. It's not clearly documented. The organization's not given the resources. And so good folks trying to do good work take it upon themselves until at which point it just starts to break down the organization. Inefficient policy processes or procedures, some of which are just old and aren't up to date with the current processes that are in place or the technologies, such that organizations end up having a dual process work, or redundant and non-value-added activity. So some of the traditional approaches to reduction are things like industrial engineering, strategic planning, process improvement, program management, business intelligence, but they generally fall short addressing the seams between the strategic priorities, organizational performance, and required resources. And that shortfall is really because they're not timely. They normally take a long time and do not allow for a rapid response. They're generally incomplete because The multiple disciplines are stovepiped along functional lines, and they lack integration and transparency. The results are generally fractured. They're static, so they're in PowerPoint or some type of spreadsheet or some type of Word document that doesn't allow for the asking and answering of the next question, and really don't look for predictive analytics. And they're really expensive. They're labor intensive and require very specific skills to execute. So over the last 6 years, we found really 4 ways that organizations reduce their resources or can reduce their resources. The most common and probably the highest risk is called the fair share method. Some people call it salami slice or peanut butter spread. But these are horizontal cuts across all the organization. Everybody takes their fair share of the pain. The risk is you lose organizational viability. A shop of 20 is now a shop of 2, and they are only able to talk about what they were used to be able to do, but they don't have the critical mass to be able to perform that. The next one, which actually was called out in the GAO report, is consolidation. It's an alignment of like organizations and functions. What I found personally is generally when these decisions are made and they begin to integrate these organizations and functions, they lack the data to execute, which it really introduces seams and gaps and risk into the performance of the work. Centralization, which is the removal of organizational layers. This is rolling up organizations, but again, they generally lack the data. More than likely, they lack the objectivity to integrate the functions and overcome the complexity of such an endeavor. And then there's the last one, which is probably the most difficult because it requires the elimination. This is a removal of low priority missions and non-value added work. And nobody really ever wants to give anything up. So how do we approach this? We've really broken this down and have incorporated the best of multiple professions and processes to come into a holistic approach that's supported by technology and a model so we can do this quickly and rapidly. First of all, we assess the environment, we develop scenarios and identify the strategic plan, assess and align and optimize the resources, and then move into more of a decide, govern, monitor, and a change management implementation area. What's really neat about this is we can really enter this problem at any point. If the organization has the data or they have started this, we can really come in at any point in this process. But really when we talk about assessing the environment, it's what drives the work to your organization. Why do you do what you do? What are the directives, the customers, the stakeholders, policies? And then what is it that you're required to do? What are your missions? What are your strategic priorities? Like I said, in many cases, organizations don't prioritize their missions, so there's little to no trade space. All the low-hanging fruit has been already picked over the last several years of budget reductions. What are the objectives and how do you measure success? In the main portion of this, it's really about current capacity. So what are you doing? How well are you doing it? What can you improve? And so it looks at the organization in terms of structure, your workforce, positions, personnel, technology, your resources, and something that we include, which is a work breakdown structure for the organization, which gives you a common taxonomy of the work and the ability to look across the organization or across multiple organizations. The functional work that you perform, how important is it? How well are you doing it today? And what can you do to improve it? And then the workforce contribution or the resource contribution. Who's doing what and how much of it and how well is it producing? This allows us to really measure the current capability. So how much and how well are you doing? What are you producing? And how does that align back to the required capability? Are there gaps? Are there overlaps? And then that allows us to come up with recommendations for implementation. So how do you implement changes? Where can you take risk? Where are you willing to accept risk? Where are you willing not to accept risk? And then around that are performance metrics and then managing the change that's ultimately going to result. Now, this is the point where many organizations or many of you would say, well, I have all that data. I have all that information. But what we found is that is absolutely true, but in most cases we don't find the intersections of the organization. So how do we turn that into a model and structure that such that we can look at it from different angles and do the analysis so we understand the interdependencies and alignment across. We built some technology that really didn't exist until we looked at it, which is the ability to look and capture, integrate, survey, display, analyze, and optimize to the demands of the organization. And then an organizational analytics dashboard that we've laid on top of that such that there's transparency through user-driven business intelligence. We typically take 5 steps to resource optimization and measuring your organizational health, where we'll come in and a discovery piece where we'll capture all the relevant information, interview the stakeholders, facilitate any workshops that need to be facilitated, collect the data, assess it, describe it, look at a complete view of your work, your workforce, and the current alignment. That'll allow us to then populate the model and diagnose. So what is your strategic priorities and how are you aligned to those? What are your gaps between your current capacity and your resourcing levels? Identify the opportunities to divest of low-value work and make investments in the process and policy such that they improve your mission performance. That diagnostic allows us then to come down and prescribe recommendations to identify low-risk offsets to fully fund your mission priorities, optimize your workforce size and shape and composition, and align your resources to your work requirements. Interesting, we also are able to predict. So when we do the scenario-based planning is what do you anticipate your environment to look like? Are you adding missions? Are you taking budget cuts? Is your workforce going to change radically? Are you inserting disruptive technology? And that allows us to do what-if optimal staffing excursions such that you can respond, vice react to change in your organization. All of this then solidifies into an implementation where we can help you design a governance process and strategic workflows to implement those changes, measure those changes, and monitor your current performance. So the RPM, or Resource Planning and Management Decision Support System, we've developed to be an easy, accessible web interface. So you have the required capability and mission priorities. It allows us to go in and put all that in there from the various doctrines, directives, and strategic documents that you may have, and then easily describe them and prioritize them. We develop a common taxonomy of the work or the tasking into what we call organizational work breakdown structure, where we use a hierarchical approach to commonize the work such that we can look not just vertically down the organization, but horizontally across internally to the organization or across multiple organizations. This allows us to identify redundancies, overlaps, and gaps in performance to mission. Most of the time we build these work breakdown structures based on sources that have a pedigree, things like business enterprise architectures or mission essential tasks or defense DoD function codes. What we found is no one list actually fully represents all the work an organization does, so we come up with a melded approach and then able to pull in things that had not previously been documented. This allows, then we go and collect the organizational data and integrate it, so we're able to define the organization such that we can build up the organization in terms of its organizational diagram and the positions like you would normally see within an organization, but also be able to assign the capabilities that an organization is supposed to perform and the tasks they're supposed to perform, and then allow us to put the actual faces to the spaces. Once we have that, we're able to understand the importance, performance, and improvement of the tasking. So this is an example of one organization in a recent study where these are all the tasks that they perform, and then we're able to assess them in terms of their contribution to their mission. Once I understand the priority of these missions and I understand the contribution of this specific piece of work within the organization, I can now identify the actual importance of the work, if it's performed or if it's not performed. We look at coordinating or providing legal services as this particular task, but what's the current level of performance? And we assess that by a model where either you never meet, sometimes meet, occasionally do not meet, or you meet, or you exceed. And what the model that we've provided is looking to do is satisfy or move to center. So in other words, the model will seek to add labor if you're not meeting a task, or take away labor if you're overperforming a task at the detriment of another task. Another area is we look at the effectiveness. So what improvements could you change or invest in that would improve the performance of the work, thus resulting in less requirement for a resource? In this case, there's a information technology. They require better collaborative technology, which would provide some work or more efficiency to the work. And then really the last thing is the contribution of the resources, the workforce, the IT, the facilities. In this case, I'll show you an example of workforce. So what are the positions doing across the top? How much time notionally are they spending against each of the tasks? And that gives us a measure of the current as is, of what it takes to perform the work at a certain level of performance aligned to a capability or requirement. By doing this, this allows us to take all the information that's out there in structured and unstructured data, structured being HR databases, manpower databases, budgets, and so forth, and unstructured data such as documents and strategies, and put it all in one space and align it. Once that alignment's accomplished, we can then pull it into an organizational discovery dashboard. And this is user business intelligence that we've worked with as an implementation partner with ClickView, which is a business discovery platform that bridges the gaps between traditional business intelligence solutions and standalone office productivity applications, which enables users to forge new paths and make new discoveries. One of the differentiators here is an associative experience. And so when we pull this in, just like we talked about the priority of the required capabilities in the previous slide, this is in a live project where you see this is the relative priority, this is the weighted of the current effort across those priorities, and you can see that they're putting a tremendous amount of effort into internal organizational sustainment. By using this type of model, we can click and filter down on the actual individual tasks across multiple parts of the organization they're actually performing against this capability, and then assess it in multiple ways. The next thing I'd like to show you is the ability to drive down into the workforce. So how many authorized are funded? How many funded or filled? Look at percentages, the hours of capacity available to perform work that allow you to understand where your trade space is. In this case, the workforce capacity for officers, they're exceeding it. So if you think about capacity to be as 1 man year of work, they're actually working about 130% or 37% over that. Civilians, they're paying about 16% overtime, and so forth and so on. We can drill down specifically into individual records to understand exactly what each position does, how they perform it, and how important it is to the overall organization. That allows us to actually score each individual position as to its priority or its risk, or if you will, benefit to the overall agency. We can look at the tasks individually, so how much time is being spent across various tasks. That allows us to cost out tasks and do a various amount of research and analysis depending on what each organization needs. We can look at the distribution of importance. We talked about that earlier, but as you can see here, a good portion of the work is really kind of daily routine work, which is what you would expect to find. But if you ask them the question straight on, more than likely everything would be of very high importance, regardless to mission, because it was specific. Then you're looking at the distribution of performance. So in this case, this organization is 75% of the time or so, they're meeting their performance objectives for all of their tasks. But as we talked about earlier, they're doing it at a great expense of nearly 120% over capacity. So they're overworking their people, they're potentially burning out their people, and any reduction in budget without a reduction in work or an understanding of how to introduce better efficiencies would just exacerbate the problem. Then this is the ability to look at improvement scores. So how would it help improve the performance such that it gives you more trade space if you were to invest or change these areas. This allows us, through business rules and modeling, allows us to understand what the requirement is for this organization. And if you break this down, the blue is the positions. This is what they currently have authorized to fund it in terms of their capacity and man years. The red is what they currently have filled. The green is the current effort that they currently do. So as you can see, we talked about it was about 116% or so above capacity. So they're working longer than a standard work week. The gold here is really the model suggesting an assessed requirement in terms of FTE or man years. And what that means is to meet all of your work and really narrow it down to that meets objective. So you're meeting those performance standards. And if you were to invest in those areas for improvement, that would move you down to what we call an objective requirement, which allows us to understand what the return on investment would be to change our investment in, say, technology or training or so forth. We talked about earlier was looking at organizational redundancy and looking for efficiencies. So it allows us to look, because we're using a common work taxonomy, to look across multiple organizations to see how they contribute to various tasks. In this case, support to higher headquarters, you can see it's common to everyone. There's 45 of the 49 organizations are providing support to it, which results into just this one task, which is about 14 man years or so, which is about 5% of the organization's actual capacity. And 214 positions are actually working on that. So in the live model, we'd be able to filter down on that and potentially look for ways to reduce that amount of effort such that we could move it to other higher priority tasks. And then finally, it gives us the ability to do what-if analysis. And so in this example, you can see that the level of, these are sliders, officer, enlisted, civilian, and contractors. And we originally set these at the current level of performance, which we talked about was meets. So using a fair share example, we moved to really kind of emulate sequestration and understand the drop in performance across the organization if all things remain equal on a peanut butter spread type situation. We drop down to 80%, and you can see how the performance drops off significantly. Now, that's generally where most studies would stop, but what we've built in was also an optimized solution where we actually reload the positions to more closely align with the objectives of the organization. And so you can see we can improve that slightly in this example, improve the performance. So when we talked about the workforce optimization and scenario planning, really based on the scenarios we build up front, we look at the as-is organization, and using the wealth of information that we've developed, we can take the organizational tasks, the workforces, and the resources and develop different parameters, goals, and scenarios to run an optimization to find out what happens either to performance if budget cuts were to happen, or what resources would be required if you brought in new work or new missions, how technology or improvements to the organization or process changes would actually improve the performance of the organization and the resulting resource requirements. Each of these are tailored to the actual need of the organization, and they're prescriptive in nature. Also predictive if we start to look at what the organization would look like in the future and then optimize to that. What do I mean by that? Well, positions versus the recommended requirement, if you look at it in terms of a risk model, positions being on the vertical and the recommended requirement achieved or the work completed or performed across the horizontal. And as we come down that line and start to cut positions, you can see a way to assess risk, and at some point you'll lose organizational viability. Each organization is different, so the next question then would be, what do we change or how do we improve, or what processes or technology can we insert such that we can still get to that level of performance or work output with less resources. So one example of how we performed this in the past with great success was Navy Fleet Forces Command and Commander 2nd Fleet. And OpNav actually approached us because they didn't have the methodology or the tools to go in and do a rapid, and when I mean rapid, in about 6 months, organizational and workforce study to look at fleet forces and Second Fleet in preparation for the POM 12 headquarters reductions that we talked about in the previous slides. They needed to determine what the risks and requirements were, and then how deep they could cut without cutting too deep or cutting to the bone, such that they could quantify the risk to mission and recommendation at a billet level. We came in and took our broad range of capabilities, and you can see which ones we applied here, and enacted the previous methodology, or this methodology, to complete the assessment of the as-is alignment of mission, task, and workforce. We determined the benefit or risk or the priority of 1,947 positions across all labor categories. And we developed a workforce optimization, a risk optimization model to assess the impact of future scenarios. This allowed us to provide a range of options that traded workforce reductions for risk and benefit. And one of the interesting things in the study was we initially treated these as two separate organizations without the knowledge or understanding that they had already made the decision to merge the organizations. But we had realized that this organization had lost viability over the years of peanut butter spreads and salami slices, so to speak, and that they had very similar missions. And if we merged them and then optimized both organizations together, we could actually find more savings for budget with a much reduced risk. And in many cases, they actually increased the performance of the organization such that they were able to perform their mission. What did they get? Well, they got full visibility into importance, quality, and workload. They were able to eliminate 344 permanent positions, provide targeted range of options such that they could decide, and then provided the recommendations for the organizational alignment. These were two commands, almost 2,000 positions, 344 reduced for a savings over the FIDIP of $100.8 million. This was also in the same GAO report was highlighted because further efforts to examine resource needs and improve data could provide additional opportunities for cost savings. You can see here the merging of the U.S. Fleet Forces and Second Fleet where I established these numbers. But also they called out the example that the Navy was able to specifically provide detailed information on the number of positions and really how they would eliminate infrastructure and resources and the estimated savings, where other services were unable because they just didn't have the tools or insight. At bottom line to all of this was without the tools, the understanding, the models, and the access to reliable data, it's very, very difficult for DoD to make efficiency assessments and decisions that won't have a disruptive impact on mission readiness. A little bit more deeper dive here. So this was on the Fleet Forces Second Fleet. This was COA 1, Course of Action 1, where we looked at both organizations independently. You can see we were really only able to assess 35 and 42 positions that we would recommend with confidence on a risk reduction to eliminate. But then when we merged them, we were able to really come up with a much deeper set of cuts and a higher percentage. And then as you can see in the final result previously, they went much deeper than that because they were able to eliminate whole missions. So just to wrap this up, this is about designing an intelligent organization or making your organization smart, meaning it's strategic. It's aligned, the resources are aligned to strategy, and it's based on your current and future environment, not necessarily your internal needs. It's measurable, so you understand success. It's adaptive, so you can plan for change. Resourced, important, vice urgent, so it's aligned to the strategic priorities. And then transparent, such that you're integrating business intelligence, you get the actionable insight and the ability to make good and informed decisions based on data. We'd welcome any opportunity to discuss your challenges and how we could help. And thank you very much.